Hello everyone, Sidewin here, and today I'm going to be talking about how you can select your equipment in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So this is something that I've noticed a lot of people have a bit of difficulty with just due to how many items there are. This is the Archives of Nethys homepage, and on here you can see that there are a total of 4,867 items loaded into Archives of Nethys, meaning that all of them are different items in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So to start, I'm going to also open up Path Builder and show where you select your weapons within Path Builder. So there are these tabs here, weapons, defense, and gear, which are affected by what equipment you select. So right here, weapons, you can add any weapon you want, and it gives you the entire list. There is no filtering available in Path Builder, which is understandable as it's a single developer project. Then, when you go over to defense, by default there's no armor. It also displays all the armor, and here you can filter by light, medium, and heavy. Over here you can also filter by simple, martial, and advanced. Then you can also add a shield under the defense tab. And finally, gear, you can add whatever items your character has. These will be displayed on the generated PDF character sheet. And it's mostly mundane items that are shown here. However, a couple of them, namely the high-level rare ones, like this level 12 one here, are magical items. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how you go through and select each of these categories, starting with weapons. So here on Archives of Nethys, you can see the table summary of different things about the weapon, such as its name, whether it's permissible, uncommon, or rare in Pathfinder Society, where the weapon's source originates, and the weapon's type, as well as other essentially traits about this item. So you want to consider these traits depending on your character. So to start, many classes that are not meant to be fighters have only simple weapon proficiency. So if you had that kind of class, think a wizard, you can go here, filter by simple, and it'll only display the simple ones. However, for this, I'm going to be talking more about the martial type characters. So I'll set it to martial here. So you might already have an idea what weapon your character uses, which can make this a very easy process as opposed to the general you don't have an idea, you're just going through the list. So to start, some things you might be considering are whether your character's melee or ranged, as shown here. Here I'm going to set it to melee, but you can select one or the other as you need for your character. So if you have mainly ranged weapon feats, as a fighter, you should choose ranged. If you have mainly melee, choose melee. Most other classes are defined more towards one way or the other, with a couple of exceptions, namely the Thaumaturge, which pretty much needs only a one-handed weapon. So here you can select the number of hands. So generally, you can select multiple to have weapons in those categories shown. So since I'm going to show for Thaumaturge, I'm going to select these categories, 0 and 1. So 0 plus essentially just means like weapons that don't actually take a hand. Then you can also select damage type, like if you're trying to fill a damage type, such as being in a campaign with a lot of demons and wanting to match up damage types. And you can also select the weapon group, although that matters more at higher levels when the weapon specialty feats come into effect. Then you can see here there's still a lot of options, even though I set it to melee. So then how can you filter down a list of, here it's 86 options? Well, to start, you can go to traits. Traits essentially let you filter it down to the types of things you're going to be using. So for instance, if you're going to be attacking a large number of times, you can select Agile, because it reduces the multi-attack penalty after the first attack. Another trait you might note is the various athletics action traits, such as disarm, trip, and shove. These weapons let you use these actions while your hand is held up with the weapon. So for instance, a Trip weapon will let you, even if you have both hands full, such as a shield and a flail, you can still trip enemies with it. Then, some more unique ones in here are Twin, which means that you get a bonus for attacking with the other weapon. Sweep, which means when you attack a second enemy in a round, you get a bonus to attack. And Parry, which is somewhat a shield replacement. The other biggest, most important traits to know are Backstabber and Deadly. Both of these provide bonuses on criticals, although Backstabber functions in a different way than the other one. So here, when you hit an off-guard creature, the weapon deals additional precision damage. Meanwhile, Deadly and Fatal, which is a near synonym in this case, makes it so that on a crit you deal more damage. So Deadly adds an additional weapon, an additional dice of the same listed type. So for instance, the damage for one of these will be like Deadly D8, so that means it adds D8. Fatal, meanwhile, increases your weapon dice size. So if you have a fatal weapon, that means that if the die is normally a D4, fatal could increase it to a D6 or a D8. And then you double the damage rolled on those choices. So for here, because I'm going off Thaumaturge to show how you can filter down a large list, I'm going to be looking for a few traits in particular. So to start, you might consider Finesse, but that's if you're using Dexterity. So in this case, since I don't really have a particular, idea, I'm going to start with selecting Reach, as it gives additional range. And right here, you can see now you have 5 options. And from here, it's actually relatively easy to choose. For instance, you might go in here and look through and note, oh, that's uncommon, I probably can't get that easily. That's uncommon too, that too. All except one are uncommon. And then the last one, you might just be left with it as your only option. And in that case, well, you have your choice. Or, if you don't have the uncommon thing applying, you might note, trip also sounds nice, So then you're narrowed it down to 3 of them. Then, you might note, I don't really want non-lethal, because non-lethal means that you have to take a circumstance penalty when you try and kill someone. So, in that case, you could rule out that option. Then you might note, oh, what's the difference between these two? There isn't, really, except for cost. One is slightly more expensive than the other. In that case, it's more of a you just pick based off what you want. You could also look at the damage type. In many cases, you will run into 2 weapons being relatively similar. Now I'm going to undo that trait and go back and say, well, what if the character was supposed to use a sword? Let's say I'm selecting off that. So here, under weapon groups, I can pick sword. And now it's down to 26 results. Then, because of it being a thaumaturge, there are a couple of traits which I don't want. For instance, twin, which requires you to have 2 weapons. So minus that out, it's removing all twin results. You're still at 23. Then, you can always try and see, will something pop up if I click this? If I would go and click Fatal, there's no results. Or Deadly, now there's 5 results. However, many of them are uncommon again. Some GMs care about that more than others, so always ask your GM before just picking up uncommon options, etc. And another thing to note is that sometimes there are these weapons that are called fusion weapons, which technically function as 2 weapons and will come up under 2 groups. Here, that's the rapier pistol. And I've already filtered it to martial, but what if I had, just to show you, what if I had forgotten to do that? Well, now the same list is 8 options. And you might note here that some of these weapons are advanced. So advanced weapons, the only class which has any proficiency at all to start is the fighter. Once you get beyond that initial proficiency level, you can take feats to gain proficiency. However, in general, you should select martial weapons if you have martial weapons available, over selecting simple weapons. There are some classes which have some exceptions to that, with feats. So in general, like if you have a specific image, you can select that. But that was showing what you can do if you don't. Now I'm going to swap over to looking at armor. So by default, there are 36 armor shown, and I'm going to assume this is for a level 1 character to just make this simple. So here, under level, you can input the max level, which in this case, I'm going to set it to 1. Because this is what's available to a first level character. And right here, you might note there's a couple of different options. And in general, you want to select the type of armor which provides the greatest benefit for your dexterity and proficiency level. So for instance, some classes only have unarmored proficiency. In this case, you have these 4 options. You never want to be unarmored because it eliminates the chance for you to add runes. Then, really, there isn't much of a difference between a gi and explorer's clothing aside from one being higher cost. Scroll robes, meanwhile, let you essentially add a scroll to the armor, which can be useful, but it isn't necessarily like knockout worth as much gold as it costs. And the other thing here is unarmored, like there isn't really a lot of variance between the different unarmored options. You do want something for runes. And right here is an armor group, which sometimes gets brought into effect, but for this one, it doesn't come into effect because right here, as noted on the Archives of Nessus staff note, there is no medium or heavy cloth armor, and thus there is no armor specialization effect. Armor specialization is a higher level martial feature as well. But then to look at if you have a bit more leeway with proficiencies, for instance, light armor is given to a lot more classes, and right here you have a lot more options. However, you still want to look at this gold cost. You can't afford, for instance, this at first level. An armored coat costs 20 gold pieces. So here, I'm going to select the monetary cost of the items, because at first level you have 15 total GP. So let's say that you didn't want to spend all your money on armor. So for this, I'm going to go with, I'll go with 800. That's about equivalent to, I believe, yeah, it's about equal to 8 GP. So this is a reasonable price for armor, especially for a martial character. So here you can see the different types of armor, and each one has a category. These only come into effect at higher levels. So first level, it's more a case of you can pick whatever you like best for flavor reasons. Additionally, you can look at this dexterity cap. So if you have very high dexterity, you want to look at ones with a higher dexterity cap generally. And you'll note that almost all of these have -1 check penalty, which applies to most active actions. So if you want to avoid that, you might go with padded armor. However, for the highest protection, you generally want to go with ones with higher protection. There's also one other trait to mention here, which is noisy. It makes it so that others can hear you far more often. Essentially, it gives you a penalty to your stealth checks, even when you otherwise would not take one because you're strong enough to wear the armor. There's also flexible, which makes it so that your armor does not hinder acrobatics or athletics checks, which can be very good if you are doing a lot of athletics checks for, say, athletics actions. Say you're shoving people or tripping them, because by default, the armor check penalty is applied to that. There's also comfort, but that's less often a issue. Then medium is much the same. Like, there isn't a lot of difference from the traits, except for right here, hindering, which makes it so you have less speed even if you're strong enough to wear whatever you're wearing. There's also laminar, but this one just applies generally and only applies if your armor is broken. One last trait to highlight is on heavy armor, and you can see here I'm going to have to remove the cost cap. That's because this isn't really a thing on the cheaper armor, and it's also a level 2 item. Yeah. So right here, you can see these were the options, and there's Bulwark, which lets you add +3 to reflex saves, rather than using your dexterity modifier. That trait can allow a strong character to dump dexterity completely, because they won't have a good bonus to it, and it's also potentially good, like, it basically just nullifies the consequences of having super heavy armor. And that's what I'm going to be, like, mostly finishing with, but I'm going to add one last note here for just general equipment that you will want to take note of, because these are common issues which come up. So first off, if you're a caster, you might want a spellcasting thing, such as a primal symbol for druids. This is more my traditionalist side speaking, though. Then another item which is often mentioned in D&D and Pathfinder circles is a 10-foot pole, because this means that you can poke the traps which are far away and hopefully not get them blown up in your face. You may also want to carry just general items. Note that there's something called an adventurer's kit, which provides a lot of the necessities, like, say, a bedroll and I think it might give a torch, but you may want torch and flint and steel, especially if you're going into dungeons, just to light things up. If you have a lantern, you want some oil to restock that lantern. And there's also a lot of just kits, which make it so that you can do certain actions better. Like, there's lockpicks, which can make it so that you can pick traps. And some things that are a little more unique are like clothing for specific climates, which give you advantages on resisting the tough weather that you may encounter while on adventure. That is all for today. If you have additional questions on this, or a particular video you would want me to make on one class or another about this equipment choice, I will consider any suggestions made in the comments. Thank you for watching.